Bring to us your poetry from inspiration sought. Come join us with your images, your verses, words, and thought. From here we'll share your balladry with those who do not know it. This platform's here for you to show the world that you're the poet.
Welcome to episode 19 of You're the Poet, the poetry podcast featuring you. I'm host Matt Burgio, and I'm here with co-host Phil Burgio. Phil, welcome.
Anytime.
Here at You're the Poet, our purpose is to share our love of poetry with the world and to invite you to do the same. I want to start by saying thank you to all of our guests and especially our listeners who have made You're the Poet possible. We hope you enjoyed the podcast and the poetry that is shared here. Our featured guest for this episode of You're the Poet is James Bryant. James, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm about to put your concept to the test because if I can be a poet, literally anyone can be a poet.
Awesome. Well, we're glad you could join us, and we look forward to your contribution to the episode.
Thank you.
To start things off, I'm going to turn it over to Phil to share a classic poem for the episode. Phil?
Okay, this is a poem by Sir John Harrington. He was an English courtier author. He's credited with inventing the flush toilet. He's referred to as the saucy godson because Queen Elizabeth I was his godmother, but he fell from favor due to his risque writing and politics and just being a wit at court. He was banished from the court, and the reason he wasn't sent to trial is because Elizabeth had mixed feelings about him. So she just chose to banish him from court instead of going to trial. This poem didn't have a title, but I'm going to title it Such Color Had Her Face. Such color had her face as when the sun shines in a watery cloud in pleasant spring. And even as when the summer has begun, the nightingales and boughs do sit and sing. So the blind God, whose force can no man shun, sits in her eyes, and thence his darts does fling, bathing his wings in her bright crystal stream, and sunning them in her rare beauty's beam. In these he heads his golden-headed dart, in those he cooleth it and tempereth so. He levels thence at good Oberto's heart, and to the head he draws his bow. Sir John Harrington.
All right, thank you for sharing. Did you find any information on who that poem was written to or written for or anything?
No. Most of his poetry is kind of obscure. He did a lot of translating and other things, and he was a knight. He got, what do they call it?
Knighted?
He got knighted after some action in fighting the Irish.
Okay.
He was one of Queen Elizabeth's favorite courtiers, but apparently was a pain in the butt with his wit and his comments. Plus, his risque poetry and his political beliefs were not quite Elizabeth's.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I like the poem. I think it's obviously written to a lady. I'm one who likes to both read and write to love poetry. I've written plenty throughout the years. Some of it might appear here on the podcast. Well, even today's poem I'll be reading was written for a lady.
Yeah, I mean, having heard it, it makes me think I'm on the wrong podcast because that is poetry that was read just now. It had rich, beautiful imagery, and it really seemed to capture the essence of beauty. So quite rich with imagery.
Yeah, I agree there. And don't worry, you're on the right podcast. We don't want this podcast to be all about people that are published poets. This is all about being the poet. We want down-to-earth amateur people. You know, you can be poets of any range.
I fit the bill.
Awesome.
I read a poem based on my love for beer, and it was written in the Dr. Seuss format. So, we don't have to all be Shakespeare's here.
I heard that one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we had our episode 5 guest, Brett Eldridge. He hadn't done anything poetry related since high school assignments, and he heard an episode of our podcast and it inspired him to write a poem, and so we had him come on as a guest. He'd only written one poem at that point, dedication to his wife for Mother's Day. So yeah, you're in the right spot.
All right.
All right, from here, I'm going to share a poem for the episode. This poem, I'll say a little bit about the form first. This is a villanelle. There was a time in my poetry explorations where I was trying out different forms. So this one is a villanelle. One of the most popular villanelles out there is the poem Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas. Basically, a villanelle is a 19-line poem that uses repetition and rhyme to create a lyrical quality and emphasize the message. It's made up of 5 3-line stanzas or tercets and 1 4-line quatrain that kind of wraps it up. The first line of the poem is repeated at the end of the second and fourth stanzas, and is also the second to last line of the final stanza. And it has an kind of an odd rhyme scheme of ABA, 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 ABA. So it kind of only uses 2 rhymes throughout. So you kind of have to be creative in getting it out there. Even though it kind of has a Spanish and Italian origin from their songs, kind of became popular in a French poem during the Renaissance period. Anyway, so I decided to try my hand at the villanelle. And this poem is called In My Arms Again. Sitting here alone with book and pen, with cricket chirps and cat to keep me sane, I long to hold you in my arms again. For you have been away since who knows when, and like the days I slowly, slowly wane, sitting here alone with book and pen. I try to count the days from 1 to 10, though only 5, my heart still feels the strain. I long to hold you in my arms again. I feel the plight of all the single men who share with no one everything in vain, sitting here alone with book and pen. However, I will make it until then, the time when you'll return to heal my pain. I long to hold you in my arms again. It's then that I will shout aloud, Amen, rejoicing that our love will ever reign. Sitting here alone with book and pen, I long to hold you in my arms again. Matthew Burgio.
Nice.
When did you write that?
Some years back.
Okay.
But yeah, just kind of the poet sitting there at night thinking about missing the woman that he loved.
I think what's interesting is that you were able to capture a complete story with the villanelle. I've tried to write them myself, and because of the repetition of the lines, it's sometimes hard to get your entire story out there.
Yeah.
So this one really, I think the form serves the poem well.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. It gets to be a little tricky when you have, there's a couple forms out there that utilize that. I think the triolet is another one, or triolet, where you really got to be conscious of repeating those lines, but also making them make sense in the realm of the story, like you said, the story of the poem. So, All right, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Phil to share his poem for the episode.
Okay, since we're doing different styles here, I wrote an acrostic poem. That poem used the vertical nature of poetry to spell out a hidden word or phrase. Some of the famous acrostic poems were written by Keats, Lewis Carroll, Chaucer, Blake, Sir John Davies. It even goes back to ancient Greek and Roman writing. So if you want more information, I got this from writers.com about acrostics. The poem I'm going to read, it's a Japanese philosophy, SEIJAKU. Hope I pronounced that right. SEIJAKU is a Japanese concept that embodies a state of energized calm, a serene focus that exists even in the midst of life's chaos. It is linked to tranquility, silence, and stillness. SEIJAKU is often described as a state of being where one feels centered, purposeful, and capable of decisive action. SEIJAKU, stillness and peace. Enter into my thoughts. It isn't loneliness, just a feeling of calm and quiet reflection, knowing it's a place of self and understanding, discovery, and renewal. Philip Burgio. If you write that down on paper, the first letter of each line written down brings out what your poem is.
We've had acrostics featured on this podcast before. I believe you did the Zoracres poem, and you also did your Yatori acrostic.
What I appreciated, though, about this poem was the interjection of loneliness into the body of the poem, because I think that adds an element of depth to it, because I don't know that I would have had any sense of loneliness. But when you say that it's not loneliness, it makes me wonder, well, is there an element of loneliness that the writer is feeling?
Good insight there.
I wasn't thinking about loneliness. I was just thinking about the rest of the meaning of the word, and saying, like, you can have deep thoughts and quiet reflections, but it isn't loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a feeling of calm.
Okay, nice. All right, from here we want to move to our guest section of the episode. James, you're the poet. Show us what you've got.
All right. Well, let me set this up for you a bit, but just to give you an understanding, I began writing poetry in January of 2024 because this is the year of the dragon. Specifically, it's the year of the wood dragon. And I happen to have been born in the year of the wood dragon. And the next occurrence of that will be in 60 years. So that seemingly had some level of significance to me personally. So I thought, let me try my hand at writing something about a wood dragon because the concept was fascinating. Because how can a dragon be made of wood since dragons breathe fire? So I'm going to go ahead and read my composition, The Wood Dragon. Touch the wood dragon and blister. If not by flame, you die by splinter. For nothing this spectacular can help but harm its handler. It feeds on itself to survive. No one gets out alive. But as bright things often will, its own light itself will kill. All will soon combust until nothing is left but dust. James Bryant.
Okay, I like that one. I do. I picture a dragon like on a Disney movie made out of wood for some reason.
Nice. And I wanted to ask, you're talking about being born in the year of the wood dragon. What culture is that from, or where does that come out of?
Like the Chinese zodiac.
Okay. Wasn't sure if it was the Chinese calendar or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I like that though. I kind of like some of those differences of like, I like that touch the wood dragon and blister. If not by flame, you die by splinter.
Yeah, that was cool.
Thank you.
So I kind of like that contrast of the flame doesn't get you the.
The splinters will.
It's very descriptive. I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got another one for us?
I do. And from that, I decided to write an autobiographical poem for some reason. So I'm going to go right into that. The title of it is Hack, H-A-C-K, Hack. Why should I think I have a unique voice? I got mine from childhood where I had no choice. But to learn to live is something of a failure, not due to grades, but more for behavior. I was the boy last picked for the team. No one wanted me, or so it seemed. I couldn't throw and I couldn't catch, except maybe hell in a bad stretch. Sure, I knew my mom loved me. Look at all the toys in my room to see. But if I'm being honest with this, with my dad, I was a swing and a miss. I grew up knowing I had a different way. It took years for me to finally say that I'm gay. That didn't feel like a reason for waving a flag, not to the boy who was told he's a fag. No need for pity or say you are sorry. When I was 12, I discovered Bacardi. That's right, at Christmas, they gave me liquor. I later learned that would get me drunk quicker. I was often left on my own, hidden in my room. At night, I'd imagine I was dead in a tomb. What child pretends to commit suicide? That's a time when you should feel so alive. Somehow I made it through college. As you can see, I didn't collect much knowledge. I was something of quite the spectacle. The hair, the clothes, never expectable. Come on now, let's speed fast forward. My job was to help kids that were tortured. For 30 years, I worked with families, trying to prevent future calamities. Now I sit here pretending to be a poet. If I were, don't you think by now I would know it? Who's even bothering to read my crap? Hold up. Stop the tape. This one's a wrap. James Bryant.
All right. Thank you for sharing. I don't think you give yourself enough credit. I think this is a great poem, especially in the autobiographical sense.
Oh, when you said you weren't a poet, yeah, you are.
Yeah, I agree. I believe there's a lot of good lines there, and not just the autobiographical sense, but even some of the way you weave things in there, like being a child and playing, and even some of the baseball analogies, like can't throw, can't catch, but then also talking about your dad being the swing and a miss. Like I think you interweave some things in there that capture the essence of poetry.
You mentioned something about your job.
Yes, I worked with Child Protective Services for 30 years.
Nice.
Great. It's good, honorable.
It's a good, honorable profession.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I really like that one, though. Like I said, give yourself a little credit.
Well, from that, actually, I was told I have imposter syndrome, which I did not know what that meant at the time. I had to look it up to see what that meant. And apparently, it means someone who does not see the value of their own work. They have a lot of self-doubt and don't believe that they are talented when they may actually be talented.
Okay, I can see that. And I will say sometimes I think that it causes the individual to do even greater things. When you have that humility and you don't think that you're that great, whether it's from true humility or if it's from insecurity, I feel that forces you to always be trying to be better, and then you put out amazing work.
Well, Thank you for that. And what I found is I can write what I can't say. So I'm able to write a lot of very deep message poems that I would not be able to articulate out, but for some reason I can put them to paper.
Poetry is great for that. And we've had a couple of our guests comment on that. I know Mary Coley from episode 7 comes to mind, where she said she wasn't able to talk about these things, but putting it down in a poem really helped her talk about it and get through some things.
Mhm.
So, yeah, we've had a lot of that. All right, before we move on to another poem, I wanted to ask if you had anything to promote or anything, any projects or anything you have going on in the poetry world, or
Well, you know what? I wouldn't be able to be published in a fortune cookie. I don't have anything in the line other than keep writing.
all right, well, and that's the big part of it. Sometimes poetry's for us. It helps us get things out. But keep on writing. You never know. Put it out there. We just became part of the Wheel Song Poetry Anthology that came out, that Wheel Song Books do. And so sometimes they put out a call for poets and for poetry. They're a nonprofit that helps the organization Feed the Children. I don't know if you're familiar with them. Next time they're putting a call out there, submit something. You never know. You might be chosen to be part of the anthology if you want your work out there.
Right. I definitely should do that.
Yeah, we swung at that, and both Phil and I got published in that in this latest anthology.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I wanted to ask you too. You said you recently got into poetry writing with The Wooden Dragon. Can I ask some of your inspirations, or do you have any favorite poets or anything?
I do not. I've never studied poetry. I've never really read poetry. I didn't know why I thought I could even write a poem, but the inspiration just hit me and I started writing. And my goal would be to actually learn more. I've been experimenting with form poetry and, more formalized ways of writing. I have a long way to go, but this is a start.
But you're hooked now.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that you're just starting out. You haven't studied poetry and things like that. You just have a joy or an inspiration for poetry in your writing. That's what it's all about.
Yes.
Okay, you got one more.
Well, actually, this is a two-parter. It's kind of an interesting transition, but it goes along with the imposter syndrome theory. It's called Imposter. Have we met? Do you know me? If so, do you like what you see? I project a constructed facade to hide what is quite flawed. But every day off fall more and more flakes. Do you know just how much energy it takes? This is no hobby. It takes a lot of hard work. You have no idea what up under it lurks. An empty fountain without any coins, a country club with no members to join. Are you starting to feel a little sorry? Don't worry, no danger on this safari. The animals departed a long time ago. The cages are all empty, just so you know. What is left is locked up tight in a vault. No one's to blame, no one's at fault. Feeling bad, you ask if I feel something like hurt. I'm more concerned with the stain on my shirt. Actually, I don't feel much of anything. I'm like a vocalist with no song to sing. The extensive damage has already been done. Now the medications have taken over and won. For the most part, I am completely numb. A walking mannequin I have become. I need to hide these words to keep out of view. The last thing I want is to share this with you. James Bryant.
All right, thank you for sharing. And then you said this was a double poem?
Well, what happened is I posted it and then someone challenged me to rewrite the poem without using any rhymes.
Okay.
So I called it Imposter by Request. Hi, have we met? Do you know me? If so, you are seeing a projected facade, which I can feel falling off in flakes. It has taken a lifetime to build this wall. Now the bricks are tumbling down. What lies behind my fortress once strong? Mostly emptiness is all I can offer. My heart protected, locked in a vault. The combination to the safe, lost long ago. Don't feel sad or sorry for me. The meds have made me completely numb. I am hollow inside, a walking mannequin. I was hoping you wouldn't notice this. And maybe as usual, you won't. You only see what I want you to see. James Bryant.
All right, thank you for sharing. I think both of those poems are very interesting.
Right.
I like in the rhyming version, I think you do a great job of like the I want to say similes, but the things you do the comparisons to. I like you have no idea what up under it lurks, an empty fountain without any coins, the concept of the country club with no members to join, like these analogies and things that you give for that emptiness, that loneliness.
Yeah, thank you.
I think you do a great poetic job with that.
I appreciate it.
Great job in general with the transformation, with the challenge, the request to write it without the rhymes.
It's like, here, hold my beer. Can we do this?
Well, that's kind of what I did. But actually, I do appreciate the ending to the one that did not rhyme. I kind of liked how I was able to leave it on that note. So I was pleased.
Good job on both of them. Yeah.
And I do have a parting thing for you that I just wrote right before this because I wanted to write a triolet to summarize my experience with podcast.
Awesome.
It's called The Great Pretender. I will be the first to try, but I am never good enough. Maybe somehow I'll get by. I will be the first to try. And I always ask myself why. My skin just isn't that tough. I will be the first to try, but I am never good enough. James Bryant.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, I was looking at one of my triolets the other day. I think I'm going to share on an upcoming episode.
Now you guys got me interested in writing a triolet. Maybe I already have. I just don't know it.
Nice. Yeah, I think Peter Rivers shared a triolet with us, maybe on episode 12. But yeah, thank you. I like that little ending there. And I just like that you're continuing to write.
Well, I literally wrote it like just before this episode. I thought to myself, if I'm going to be presenting myself as a poet, I at least need to try a form poem or something that sounds like a poem. So that was my little effort.
Here's a challenge for you. Write an acrostic poem.
Oh, after hearing yours, I definitely want to do that.
Yeah, I wanted to say that in my own poetic journey, you talked about this challenge you had with Imposter, or the request that you had to write it without the rhymes. I've had some people comment on some of my poetry because a lot of my poetry follows the ballad form. It's that storytelling and it has that certain rhyme scheme. And I've had people that have encouraged me, and I haven't done it yet, but to try to rewrite the poem without that specific form, to do more of the free form poetry. I like the challenge of writing poems to a form and trying the different forms to see, can I fit it within that box? Can I make it sound poetic and fit the form?
Which you did very well with the one you presented.
Thank you. Hopefully I will get a chance to rewrite some of my poems with a different light, try to get out of the form a little bit, just in an experimentation sense.
Right.
I like writing to the forms, like you're talking about, what is that called?
The triolet.
The triolet and haikus and things like that. To me, it's like a puzzle, trying to solve a puzzle with your rhymes and your pattern and your flow. So that's why I like to do it.
Well, for me, rhyming is what propels the story. Sometimes I start with a title and I don't even know what the poem is going to be about until the rhyming, I have to say, all right, where am I going to rhyme the next word? And so I have to figure out the story between the rhymes. So for me, that's an interesting mental challenge that kind of propels the rest of the story.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I have a poem and I'm working on, been stuck on it for a couple of days because I can't find the right word that I want to use for the rhyme. It'll come.
Well, that's one thing I aspire to actually spend more time on poetry and working on a poem. I tend to write one start to finish in one sitting, and I don't go back and revisit them. And so that's another thing that I think I should spend more time with them, live with them a little bit.
I'll have to agree with you there. I tend to write poetry like you just described. I will sit down, I will write my poem, and I might stay with it a day or two if something's not sounding right and toss some things around, but I don't do a very good job of going back and re-editing and, playing around with it. Usually whenever I'm inspired at the time, that's usually how it comes out. And sometimes if I do go back, there might be minor adjustments, but for the most part, I write it and there it is. Definitely something I need to work on, I think.
I'll write and I'll be laying in bed before I go to sleep and I'll be thinking of a poem. And then if I don't write it down or record it on my phone, the next morning, I forgot what I had. So I've been, had my phone by me and hit record on my phone. I've been doing it that way too.
Oh, yeah. You have to capture the inspiration
Right.
when it comes because otherwise I'm the same way. Like we were watching a movie and I had written 4 lines of the poem in my head. So I just had to stop and go ahead and finish it.
Right. Or you forget it or lose it or
Mm-hmm.
or rewrite it before you remember to write it down.
Right.
All right, with that, we're going to wrap things up. I want to let our listeners know we're grateful that you've taken the time to tune in. We hope you're enjoying the poetry shared here, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with others. Now that the Year of the Poet community is expanding at a rapid rate, we have set up a patron site for those who would like to show their support for Year of the Poet. You can find us on buymeacoffee.com/yearofthepoet. Thank you for your support as we continue to grow. If you've written any poetry and you want to share it here, whether you just have an interest in poetry, consider yourself an amateur poet, or are a professional poet with published works, contact us to be a guest on a future episode. Please check out the website at www.you'rethepoet.com. There's a section there that answers questions about being a guest. Follow us on Facebook for updates and info, and send us an email to host@you'rethepoet.com for feedback or questions about the podcast and how to be our next guest. Until next time, Phil, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
James, thanks for being our guest.
Thank you for having me here.
Continue your poetry, James.
I will. I intend to. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Goodbye.